Now, this is an interesting one. It says, nobody's playing your game, you clown. You never make a video game to have people play that video game. And Sven Venka said this, right? He's the greatest game developer of his generation. Every generation's got one. He's king of the hill. Baldur's Gate 3 at Larian Studios. So he got in a big fight with Hasbro over Wizards of the Coast licensing of Dungeons and Dragons and the future of Baldur's Gate. And he said to them before he left the meeting, the difference between us is you make games to make money. I make money to make games. Just that's the mic drop moment. Walked out. That's why Baldur's Gate 3 is so beautiful, because it's a exposition on a story that somebody wanted to tell. And they didn't particularly care if that story was manufactured for mass market appeal or only one person loved it. It was their story. And they made that story with a lot of love and care and empathy and passion. And it's a beautiful story. It's ultimately a story about the trauma of all these characters, whether it be Shadowheart or Whale or Karlach or Gale. They all come from some different background. And if you see, they're just horrifically traumatized. And there's this world and all these things that are going on. But the real story within the story is their path to either embracing it and becoming a monster, or their path to redemption, which was a reimagining of the entire core thesis of Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. In Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, the protagonist is the son of a dark god or the daughter of a dark god. And you have literally in your blood an urge to become that dark god and be pure evil. And you can choose to either embrace that or to somehow get rid of it and become a good person despite that. And that's what made those games so profoundly incredible. And so each of those characters inside the game world, they are going on a micro journey that is an analogy to that. And it's incredibly relatable. Betrayal and abuse and deception and all these things, like you can understand where the root of that trauma comes from. And each person can see a part of themselves in each of those characters. And to be able to go on that journey with them and be part of that and experience that story is an extraordinary thing, which is why it's one of the most successful games ever made. And everybody told them you couldn't make the game. It's not possible. The early release model bailed them out, but it was too big of a game. It was too ambitious. There was too much going on. So if you're going to make a game, you make a game because you want to play that game. You want to tell that story. And you have to be completely devoted to the concept and reality that you might be the only person in the world who likes that game and wants to play that game. But if it's truly a good story and it's truly interesting, millions of people end up doing it just from the spectacle of seeing something original and new and different. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're trying to predict what a manufactured story needs to look like to be mass market appeal. And this is what Marvel is doing, and the sequels of 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 the sequels, are doing. And it's Fast and Furious 26, Star Trek 29, Indiana Jones, The Quest for Prostate Cancer. I mean, it's getting pretty bad. And there's no storytelling there. It's just nostalgia porn combined with the politics of the day. And they make a lot of money because people go, I guess, you have to take your girlfriend somewhere for the date, eat your popcorn, you watch the thing, but you can't even remember the character names. You can't feel it. You can't connect to it emotionally. And there's no point to it. There's no artistic value to it. There's nothing you gain from that. You take away from that. If you're very good at storytelling, you make people feel things. You make people understand things that they've never seen before. Like when we look at Quantum Husky, we believe the world is static and fixed, and we believe that the world is as we see it. And we get so convinced of that and so ingrained in this that we can't imagine that the world could be different, which is why it's so easy to hate people. It's why it's so easy to become dogmatic. It's so easy to become a fundamentalist. It's very easy to get ingrained. And the older you get, the more ingrained you get. Your brain gets locked into one way of doing things. And one of the most fundamental things is spatial perception. So, if you go and say there's actually new spatial dimensions, it's like you're saying that's just not possible. They don't exist. They can't exist. I can't even begin to perceive or understand that. And then you drop a person into a world with 4 spatial dimensions, and you just build a world around that story. And then suddenly they've woken up. They've left the Platonic cave, the allegory of the cave. They've become someone new, because the minute they admit and accept that that boundary that they thought was impossible to break is not only breakable, but quite easily so, and they can develop an intuition around it, they start thinking, holy moly, there's a bigger world out there. There's more things out there. In many ways, it makes you think, what if there's invisible things, or different dimensions and planes, or hyperdimensional creatures, or remote viewing, or quantum entanglement, or what all these things? They're just different. I never even thought these things could be possible. And you look for the rest of your life at the world differently. That is the key. And that's why you create games, and that's why you create movies. These are media to give you a world that you wouldn't go to otherwise. And in the case of games, live in that world and do those types of things. And you can be the hero, you can be the villain, you can go through the hero's journey. You can do something with that, and you come out the other side. And if it's a great game, you've learned and mastered that. Now, the reason you do it for yourself is, if it's not good enough for you, how could you possibly say that it's good enough for everybody else? How can you possibly say this is here? You watch these executives at Disney or other places, and you say, do you like this content? Oh, no, it's terrible. Well, why make it? Why waste your time? Well, we want to make money. They make games to make money. And people are smart. They know when you're trying to make money. When I think about Cardano, I didn't build Cardano with this concept that I'm going to get rich from Cardano. I built it to try to show the world a different philosophy, to say we have the right to rewrite the economic, political, and social systems of the world. And here's how you do it. And we have the right to write our own constitution. We have the right to create our own government. We have the right to create our own unstoppable applications, and our own money systems, and our own voting systems. And we have the right to organize any way we want. One thing that I just tweeted today, members of Intersect met with the president of Sri Lanka. We created a digital nation. This was not an individual meeting a president. This was a nation meeting a nation. Nation of Cardano meeting the nation of Sri Lanka. And they take each other seriously, and they're trading. That is a concept that is fantasy a few years ago. It's a reality here today because of what we've constructed together. So that's the story I wanted to tell, that everything around you is malleable. You can change it. And people fell in love with that. And they said, we're going to make it our own and take it to the next level. That's why when you look at Baldur's Gate 3, going back to that, Shadowheart and all these other characters no longer belong to Larian, but they don't belong to Wizards of the Coast either. They belong to the commons. If you Google cosplay with the character name, you see how many people dress up as them. You can see the mods. You can see the fan fiction, literature. They've become something else. Those stories have become everyone's stories, to inspire, to teach, to grow. And that, my friend, is why games can become successful. But you have to start with what you want to say.